Welcome to this session on how to use UrbanFootprint. I'm Andrew Federer, Vice President of Product Management at CalThorpe Analytics, and today we will be covering how to apply environmental constraints to a scenario. Constraints in UrbanFootprint are used to limit the developable acreage available during scenario painting and thus limit the impact that changing landform directly has on population, number of dwelling units, and households. These impacts are also reflected in the analytics and reporting provided by UrbanFootprint. Let's get started. To begin, let's review the layers that we'll use in this example. We'll be doing our painting using the Sonoma painted canvas for our Sonoma project. Next, we will have the Bay Area Priority Conservation layer be the primary layer that we use to limit the development and be our active constraint layer. Finally, we will show how to send a layer to the constraints manager using the TNC priority areas layer. Adding a layer to the constraints manager for your scenario is straightforward. Open the layer menu and select Add to Constraints for the layer that you want to send to the constraints manager. That's it. Let's go take a look at the Constraints Manager now. You can do that by going up to your scenario, going into the menu, and selecting Constraints. The Constraints Manager allows you to set which layers are or are not active constraints in your scenario. Here you'll see a list of layers that you've made eligible for constraints. We have two layers that can be set up as constraints. The layer we just added, TNC priority layers, is not checked. That means that newly added layer is not currently a constraint and will not impact outcomes in your scenario. The scenario has a checked layer, Bay Area Priority Conservation. That is checked and will be used as a constraint. Changing which layers are active constraints can take a few minutes after you select the Apply Changes button. So let's just use the constraint layer we have already set up. Before we see the impact of constraints on painting, let's review a few other things. You can completely remove a layer from the Constraints Manager. Open up the layer menu for the layer you want to remove and select Delete. Activating a constraint layer is as simple as checking the box for the layer you want to make an active constraint and then selecting the Apply Changes button. As mentioned earlier, this can take a few minutes as UrbanFootprint needs to recalculate all of the impacts of that action within your scenario. Let's take a look now at painting with constraints on. First, let's turn on our Bay Area Priority Conservation layer. Now, let's select a somewhat large group of parcels that will be eligible for painting. Now, let's turn on build mode and begin to make those changes that will be impacted due to the fact that we are now using constraints. You can see that the impact that constraints has by looking at the preview. The area table shows that there are impacted constraints, or impacted acres, and developable acres. So in this case, we have 159,000 constrained acres, 38,000 developable acres. When you click the paint button, you'll see the impact that painting has based on the developable acres. The constrained acres are not taken into consideration and will not be included in any further reporting or analytics. Thus, you've set up your constraint system to exclude areas that are part of the Bay Area Priority Conservation layer. Constraints impact all areas of UrbanFootprint. You'll see the impacts in the paint tracking charts, analytics, and reports. This concludes the review of using constraints in UrbanFootprint. If you have further questions, you can browse the rest of our knowledge base and reach out to us at any time via the chat dialog. Thank you.